A desperate encounter. The icy wind howled across the frozen wasteland. Snowflakes, sharp as tiny blades, cut against Ryan Carter's exposed skin. His breath came out in white clouds, disappearing into the endless storm around him. His ship was gone. 1 minute, he had been flying smoothly through deep space. The next, a strange energy pulse had hit his ship, and all systems failed. He had crashed on this unknown planet with no way to call for help. Now he was walking through an endless field of ice, his body shivering, his oxygen running low. The storm was getting worse, and he could barely see more than a few steps ahead. His helmet scanner showed no signs of life. No plants, no animals, nothing. I won't survive the night, he thought. His thermal suit was damaged from the crash. The cold was seeping into his bones. His hands were shaking, his fingers going numb. If he didn't find shelter soon, he would freeze to death. Suddenly, his foot slipped on the ice. He lost his balance and fell hard, landing face first into the snow. His body screamed in pain, but he didn't have the energy to get up. His vision blurred. His eyelids felt heavy. Maybe I should just close my eyes, just for a moment. Then, a deep guttural voice cut through the storm. Enough, human. I'm cold. Get in here now. Ryan's eyes snapped open. Had he imagined it? He forced himself to turn his head. There, through the thick snowfall, a shadowy figure stood near a small cave entrance. It was massive, easily over 7 feet tall. Its body was covered in thick fur, dark against the snow. 2 sharp, glowing eyes stared at him. A long tail flicked behind it. It looked powerful enough to crush him with one hand. Ryan's heart pounded. His first instinct was to run, but his body was too weak. The creature grunted in frustration. Did you not hear me, human? Move. Ryan didn't have a choice. His body was shutting down from the cold. If this thing wanted to kill him, it wouldn't need to trick him into a cave. It could do it right here in the open. With great effort, he crawled forward. His legs barely worked, and his hands felt like they didn't belong to him. The creature stomped forward, grabbed him by the arm, and dragged him inside the cave. The moment Ryan crossed into the dark shelter, the wind and snow disappeared behind him. The cave was deep, the walls made of smooth, dark stone. And there was heat. A small fire burned in the middle of the cave. Strange metal panels lined the walls, humming softly with warmth. Ryan collapsed near the fire, shivering. Slowly, his frozen fingers began to move again. The creature walked to the other side of the cave and crossed its arms. Ryan finally got a good look at it. It wasn't an animal. It was an alien. It had a broad, muscular chest and thick, fur-covered arms. Its hands had sharp claws, but its fingers were almost human-like. 2 large horns curved from its head, and its glowing blue eyes studied Ryan with suspicion. Ryan swallowed. He had encountered alien species before, but never one like this. The alien let out a low growl. Why are you here, human? Ryan's throat was dry. He managed to speak. I crashed. The alien narrowed its eyes. Crashed. Here, that's impossible. No ships fly over this wasteland. Ryan exhaled shakily. Well, mine did. Until it didn't. The alien grunted and sat down across from him, still watching him closely. For a moment, there was only silence. The fire crackled softly. Ryan's body finally stopped shaking. The warmth was working, but his mind was racing. Who was this creature? Why was it here? And why had it saved him instead of killing him? Finally, Ryan spoke again. You said you were cold. Why would you need a fire? You have fur. The alien let out a harsh laugh. Fur doesn't make me immune to a planet designed to kill. Ryan's stomach twisted. Designed? What do you mean? The alien's expression darkened. You think I live here by choice, human. Ryan felt a chill, not from the cold, but from the way the alien said those words. Exiled. Trapped. abandoned. The pieces clicked together. This alien had been sent here to die. Ryan didn't know why. He didn't know what this creature had done. But now, their fates were the same. And neither of them were alone anymore. Outside, the storm grew stronger. But inside the cave, the real danger was just beginning. The unlikely shelter. Ryan's body trembled, still struggling to adapt to the warmth of the cave. The fire crackled softly beside him, but it was the alien that captured his attention. He tried to catch his breath, his heart racing. He had just been dragged into a cave by a creature that was anything but friendly, or at least, that's how it seemed at first. The alien sat opposite Ryan, watching him with its glowing blue eyes. Its fur was thick, covering its body like armor. It looked like something out of a nightmare, strong, dangerous, and unknown. Ryan swallowed hard, still processing what had happened. Had this creature just saved him? Or was this some sort of trap? The thought of it sent a cold shiver down his spine. He wasn't exactly in a position to argue or run. He was injured, exhausted and surrounded by an unknown world. There was no way out except to trust this being. "What are you going to do with me?" Ryan asked, his voice low and hoarse. The words felt strange coming from his lips. He didn't know if he wanted an answer, or if he was just hoping the alien would go ahead and end his misery. But the alien didn't seem bothered by his question. It just stared at him for a moment, its expression unreadable. "I should be the one asking you that," the alien said, its voice rough and deep, like the rumbling of thunder in the distance. "But I'll humor you. You're a strange one, human." Ryan tried to sit up straighter, but his muscles felt like lead. The crash had done a number on him. His body still ached, and his suit was barely holding up. "What do you mean, strange?" "I'm just a pilot lost on your planet." The alien tilted its head slightly, eyes narrowing as if considering him. "You're not from here. That much is obvious. But you came from a ship, yes?" Ryan nodded. "A ship. Crashed here. I was trying to reach a station. But something happened. I don't know what. It just all went wrong." The alien's lips curled in what might have been a smile if its face wasn't so alien. "Your ship," it said, its voice tinged with bitterness. "You call it a ship, but to me, it's just metal. I've seen many like it crash here. None of them ever leave." Ryan blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" "This place is like a graveyard." "In a way, yes," the alien replied. It stood up and walked closer to the fire, reaching out a hand to adjust a panel in the cave's wall, which seemed to hum faintly. The cave was far more sophisticated than Ryan had expected. "What are you doing?" Ryan asked, his voice growing more alert. "I'm making sure we're safe," the alien said, not turning to face him. "You're not the only one who's been trapped here. I've been here for years, exiled, left to die." Ryan's mind raced. "Exiled? Why? What did you do?" His curiosity got the better of him, and for the first time, he felt like he might understand just a little bit of the alien's pain. The alien didn't answer right away. Instead, it looked at Ryan again, a deep sadness flickering in its eyes. "I defied my people. I refused to kill." Ryan's brow furrowed. "Kill? What are you talking about?" The alien's voice lowered, becoming almost a whisper. "My people. We are hunters. We do not value weakness. I grew up among them, taught to hunt and survive. But one day, when I was given the chance to kill a weaker creature, I hesitated. I refused. I spared it." Ryan was stunned. "You spared it? And that's why they—" The alien nodded. "Yes, they saw my action as weakness. I was exiled to this planet, a place where no one ever survives, a wasteland." Ryan's mind spun. This alien, this powerful creature in front of him, was an outcast, vanished to a planet that was nothing more than a frozen hell. But why had it saved him? "I'm sorry," Ryan muttered, unsure of what else to say. "I didn't know." The alien gave a small, almost bitter laugh. "You are sorry for me, human. I've learned to survive here. My pain does not matter anymore." Ryan stared into the fire, his mind still struggling to catch up. What kind of place was this? Why did it feel like he had been dropped into a nightmare? He didn't understand the alien's world, but he could feel the weight of the exile in its words. This was a place where only the strongest survived, and the weak were discarded. As the alien sat down across from him, it seemed to relax a little, its body language less tense. Still, Ryan could feel the intensity in the air. He couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger was just beginning. The fire crackled, and a strange, deep rumble suddenly echoed from outside the cave. It was distant, but loud enough to make the walls tremble. Ryan stiffened, glancing toward the entrance. He wasn't sure if it was just the wind, or if something else was out there. The alien stood up again, its muscles shifting beneath the thick fur. It moved toward the entrance, pausing for just a moment. "Something is out there," it muttered, more to itself than to Ryan. "I've felt it before. Predators." Ryan's heart raced. Predators. In this freezing wasteland. "What kind of predators?" he asked, his voice tight. The alien didn't answer. It just stared out into the storm, as if listening. For a long moment, there was nothing but the soft sound of the wind howling outside. And then Ryan heard it. A low, rumbling growl, echoing through the ice. Something was coming. Hunted in the snow. The growl grew louder, reverberating through the icy ground. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. He looked toward the cave entrance, a dark gaping hole now lit only by the faint glow of the fire behind him. His hands instinctively went to his belt, though he already knew his weapon was gone, left behind in the wreckage of his ship. He was defenseless. Vortak, however, didn't seem afraid. The alien stood motionless, his tall frame casting a long shadow against the cave wall. His glowing blue eyes were fixed on the darkness beyond the entrance. "Stay back," Vortak said in a low growl. His claws twitched at his sides, and Ryan noticed the fur along his shoulders rise, like a wolf bristling at a rival. "What is it?" Ryan whispered, though he had a feeling he wouldn't like the answer. "Predator," Vortak replied. "Big one. Can smell us." Ryan's heart pounded in his chest. He could hear something out there now. Heavy, deliberate steps crunching through the snow. It wasn't the sound of the wind or falling ice. This was a living, breathing creature, and it was getting closer. Why would it come here? Can't it hunt something else? Ryan asked, panic creeping into his voice. Vortak turned his head slightly, his gaze never leaving the entrance. "There's nothing else to hunt. Only us." The words hit Ryan like a blow. He tried to think of a plan, something they could do, but his mind was blank. He didn't know this planet, and he certainly didn't know how to fight off a predator that even Vortak seemed wary of. "Don't make a sound," Vortak ordered. He stepped closer to the entrance, his movements slow and measured. The firelight glinted off his claws, now fully extended. Ryan couldn't help but notice the alien's tail swaying behind him. An involuntary motion, perhaps, or a signal of tension. The growling outside stopped. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind. Ryan held his breath, his body frozen in place. He felt the weight of the icy air pressing down on him, the darkness of the cave suffocating and cold despite the weak fire behind him. And then, it happened. A massive shape moved into the entrance, blocking out the storm outside. The predator was enormous, its bulk filling the cave opening. Ryan's first impression was of raw power. Thick, shaggy fur coated in ice, a pair of glowing yellow eyes that seemed to burn like twin suns, and a maw full of jagged, gleaming teeth. It let out a deep, resonant growl, its breath misting in the cold air. Ryan's stomach churned. The creature was unlike anything he'd ever seen. It wasn't just an animal. It was a nightmare given form. He could feel its primal hunger radiating off it, an almost tangible force that made him want to shrink into the shadows. Vortak remained where he was, his claws raised, his stance firm. "This one's been hunting me for weeks," he muttered, as if speaking to himself. "Persistent, but it won't have me today." Before Ryan could react, the predator charged. It was terrifyingly fast for its size, a blur of fur and teeth lunging toward Vortak. The alien moved like a seasoned warrior, sidestepping at the last moment. His claws lashed out, raking across the predator's side. The creature howled, the sound so loud and raw it made the walls shake. Ryan scrambled backward, his body instinctively moving away from the battle. He hit the cave wall, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Vortak was quick and powerful, his claws flashing in the dim light. But the predator was relentless. It swiped with massive paws, each strike gouging into the rock or the ground. One of its swings caught Vortak on the shoulder, and he let out a sharp grunt of pain. But he didn't falter. "Get behind something," Vortak shouted. Ryan didn't need to be told twice. He ducked behind a jagged rock formation near the back of the cave, barely peeking out to see what was happening. His mind raced. He couldn't just sit here and do nothing. He had to help somehow. But how? He had no weapons, no tools, just his wits. The predator roared again, its yellow eyes narrowing on Vortak. The alien, now bleeding from a wound on his arm, stood his ground. His claws were stained with dark blood. Whether his own or the creature's, Ryan couldn't tell. Ryan scanned the cave. His gaze landed on the strange panels in the walls, the ones that Vortak had adjusted earlier. They weren't just for heat, they were connected to some kind of power source, if he could figure out how to use them. He crawled closer to the panels, staying low. His hands were still stiff from the cold, but he managed to pull himself upright. The panel surface was smooth, glowing faintly. He touched it, and to his surprise, a small interface lit up. Simple symbols flashed across the screen. He couldn't read them, but he could guess. Ryan's fingers hesitated. One wrong move, and he could shut off the heat or make things worse. But if he did nothing, they'd both be dead. He took a deep breath and tapped one of the symbols that looked like a triangle. A loud hum filled the cave. The predator stopped mid-charge, its ears flattening against its head. Vortak glanced over his shoulder, his expression a mix of confusion and recognition. "What did you do?" he demanded. I think I turned something on," Ryan stammered. The panels began to emit a low-frequency vibration. The predator snarled, backing away from the walls as if the sound was painful. It shook its massive head, claws scraping against the stone floor. "Keep it up," Vortak shouted. Ryan fumbled with the panel, pressing another symbol. The hum grew louder, and the vibrations seemed to intensify. The predator roared, retreating toward the entrance. Vortak seized the opportunity, leaping forward and delivering a powerful strike to the creature's side. The predator stumbled, then turned and flowed into the storm. For a moment, silence returned. Ryan slumped against the wall, his body trembling. Vortak turned to him, breathing heavily, blood dripping from his arm. "You're not as useless as you look," Vortak said, a faint smirk crossing his face. Ryan managed a weak smile, though his heart was still racing. "Thanks, I guess." Vortak grunted and sat down beside the fire. "Don't thank me yet. That was just one predator. There are worse things out there." Ryan swallowed hard, a sense of foreboding settling over him. The battle might have been over, but their fight for survival was far from done. An alliance of survival. The fire burned low, its crackling embers barely lighting the cave. Outside, the storm raged on, a furious wall of wind and snow battering the icy landscape. Ryan sat with his back against the cold stone, staring into the flames. Vortak sat nearby, his massive form slumped forward. The alien was silent, cradling his injured arm. Ryan's hands fidgeted with a small piece of broken metal from his suit. It was useless. Just something to keep his fingers moving, to keep his mind from dwelling on the fact that they had nearly died. Again. Vortak finally broke the silence. You shouldn't have touched those panels. Ryan looked up, confused. But they worked, didn't they? They scared off that thing. The alien's glowing blue eyes met Ryan's. Yes, this time. But those panels are ancient. They're unstable. You could have triggered something worse. He gestured to the walls around them. This cave, it isn't natural. This place was built long before I came here. By who, I don't know. But I've learned not to meddle too much. The last time I tried, I almost brought the whole thing down on my head. Ryan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. The cave had seemed like a safe haven, a place where they could at least breathe for a moment. Now it felt more like a fragile shelter perched on the edge of a cliff. One wrong move, and it would all come crashing down. Why didn't you tell me? Ryan asked, his voice tense. Vortax snorted, a sound that was halfway between amusement and frustration. You're alive, aren't you? That's all that matters. He leaned back, resting his broad shoulders against the wall. The fur on his arms was matted with blood, though he didn't seem to notice. Besides, I didn't expect you to actually figure it out. Humans aren't exactly known for their technical skill. Ryan bit back a sharp reply. Instead, he turned his gaze back to the fire. You don't think much of us, do you? I think you're soft, Vortax said bluntly. Too dependent on your machines. Too used to your comforts. Out here, comfort gets you killed. He raised his injured arm, flexing his claws. This wound, I'll live. But if I sat here waiting for it to heal, something else would find me and finish the job. That's the way of this place. Ryan nodded slowly, trying to absorb what the alien was saying. This planet, this frozen hell, was nothing like the worlds he'd known. There was no safety net, no rescue team coming to pull him out of danger. If he didn't adapt, he wouldn't survive. You think I'm weak, Ryan said finally. I know you're weak, Vortax replied without hesitation. But weakness isn't always permanent. The words surprised Ryan. They weren't exactly kind, but they weren't entirely cruel either. There was a hint of something else. Maybe respect, or at least acknowledgement that he'd lasted this long. Ryan straightened his shoulders, despite the aches in his body. I can learn. I can pull my weight. Vortax gave him a long, assessing look. Then he nodded. We'll see. The alien rose to his feet, towering over Ryan. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if the fight with the predator had taken more out of him than he was willing to admit. He walked to the cave entrance and peered out into the storm. It's still out there, Vortax said quietly. Ryan's stomach tightened. The predator. Vortax shook his head. Something else. Something bigger. Ryan didn't want to know what could be bigger than the monstrous creature they'd already faced. But Vortax's tone left no room for doubt. This planet held more dangers than either of them had encountered so far. The alien turned back to him. If you really want to survive, human, you'll listen to me. Stop questioning everything. Do as I say. If we don't work together, we won't last another day. Ryan nodded, his jaw tightening. He didn't like taking orders, but he wasn't about to argue. Not now. Vortax stepped closer, his massive form casting a shadow over Ryan. If we're going to make it, we need supplies. There's a ruin not far from here, an old structure, long abandoned. It's dangerous, but it might have what we need. Weapons, food, tools. Dangerous how? Ryan asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. Vortax's eyes narrowed. The predators aren't the only things that hunt here. The ruins are different. You'll see when we get there. Ryan swallowed hard, his throat dry. The thought of venturing out into the storm again, of facing whatever horrors awaited in those ruins, made his stomach churn. But he knew Vortax was right. Staying here wasn't an option. The alien held out a clawed hand. You said you'd pull your weight. Time to prove it. Ryan hesitated for only a moment before he reached out and clasped Vortax's hand. The alien's grip was strong, firm, almost reassuring. Fine. Ryan said. "Let's go." Vortak nodded once, a sharp gesture of approval. Then he turned and moved toward the cave entrance, his broad shoulders blocking the last of the firelight as he stepped into the storm. Ryan followed, the wind hitting him like a slap as soon as he emerged. He pulled his tattered jacket tighter around him and tried to ignore the biting cold. Together, they set off into the blinding snow toward the ruins that promised either salvation or death. Ryan didn't know what they would find, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't afford to be weak anymore. The forbidden ruins. The wind howled fiercely as Ryan and Vortak trudged through the snow-covered wasteland, their forms barely visible in the blinding storm. The ruins were supposed to be close, at least according to Vortak's cautious instructions, but Ryan could see no sign of them. His legs ached, his face stung from the cold, and his breathing was shallow against the thin air. Yet he forced himself to keep up. Vortak's broad fur-covered back was the only thing guiding him forward. "Are you sure this place exists?" Ryan asked, raising his voice over the roar of the wind. Vortak grunted without turning around. "I've been there before. Once. That was enough." Ryan squinted into the distance, hoping for any indication they were near. For hours, it felt like they'd been walking in circles. Everything looked the same out here. Endless sheets of white, jagged ice formations, and the faint glow of the storm clouds above. Vortak suddenly stopped. Ryan nearly bumped into him. "What is it?" Ryan asked. Vortak pointed ahead, his clawed finger barely visible against the snow. "There." Ryan followed the direction of Vortak's hand and froze. In the distance, a massive dark structure jutted out of the ice. It was angular, imposing, and completely alien in design. Tall spires rose into the storm, their surfaces smooth and black, untouched by time. The snow seemed to avoid the structure, as if the very presence of the ruins repelled the elements. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. "What is that?" Vortak glanced at him, his expression grim. "The remnants of something ancient. Older than your kind. Older than mine." The words sent a chill down Ryan's spine. He stared at the looming structure, a sense of unease settling over him. "Come on," Vortak said. "We don't have much time." As they approached, the air grew heavier. Ryan could feel it pressing against his chest, a strange density that made every step harder. The entrance to the ruins was a large gaping doorway carved into the base of the structure. Strange symbols etched into the black walls glowed faintly, pulsing with a rhythmic light. "What do those mean?" Ryan asked, nodding toward the symbols. Vortak didn't answer immediately. He reached out, running a clawed finger over one of the glowing patterns. "They're warnings," he said at last, "telling us to keep out. Why would we come here if it's so dangerous?" Ryan's voice was barely above a whisper. "Because," Vortak replied, stepping inside the doorway, "we need what's in here more than we fear it." Ryan hesitated, staring into the dark interior. The cold wind seemed to stop at the threshold, as if the ruins themselves created a barrier against the storm. With a deep breath, he followed Vortak inside. The moment he stepped through the doorway, the atmosphere changed. It was warmer, though not in a comforting way. The air was thick, and the faint hum of unseen machinery reverberated through the walls. The interior was vast, with high ceilings and walls lined with strange, intricate designs. Pulsing lights moved along the edges of the floor, creating the illusion of a living organism rather than a building. "What is this place?" Ryan asked, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "An old stronghold," Vortak said, his voice low. "Built long before we were ever meant to be here. It's been abandoned for centuries, if you can call a place like this abandoned." Ryan frowned. "What do you mean?" Vortak didn't answer. Instead, he motioned for Ryan to follow. They moved deeper into the ruins, their footsteps echoing against the polished floor. Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were watching them. The strange patterns seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. He turned to speak, but Vortak raised a hand, signaling him to be quiet. The silence was oppressive. Every sound they made seemed magnified, as if the ruins themselves were amplifying their presence. Ryan's skin prickled. He felt exposed, vulnerable. "Do you hear that?" Vortak asked suddenly, his ears twitching. Ryan stopped, straining to listen. At first, he heard nothing but the low hum of the structure. Then, faintly, a new sound emerged. Mechanical clicks, like the gears of an ancient machine, turning somewhere deep within the ruins. "What is it?" Ryan whispered. Vortak's claws flexed. "I don't know, and I don't like it." The sound grew louder, accompanied by a faint vibration in the floor. Ryan's heart began to race. He turned to look behind them, but the entrance was no longer visible. The walls seemed to shift again, closing them in. "We should leave," Ryan said, his voice trembling. "Whatever that is, it's coming closer." Vortak's eyes glowed brighter. "If we leave now, we'll never know what's in here, and we'll never find what we need to survive." Before Ryan could argue, a sudden beam of light shot down from above, illuminating the chamber. A loud metallic voice echoed through the space, speaking in a language Ryan didn't understand. Vortak snarled, his claws raising defensively. "What's it saying?" Ryan asked, panic rising in his chest. Vortak growled. "It's a warning. It's saying, unauthorized presence detected. Initiating purge." Ryan's stomach dropped. "Purge? What does that mean?" Before Vortak could answer, a deafening clang filled the air. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a mechanical figure, tall, humanoid, but made entirely of dark metal. Its glowing eyes locked onto them, and a low, vibrating hum began to emanate from its chest. "Run," Vortak said through gritted teeth. Ryan didn't need to be told twice. He turned and sprinted down the nearest corridor, his boots slipping on the smooth floor. Vortak was right behind him, the alien's heavy footsteps pounding like thunder. The machine followed, its movements unnaturally fast. Each step it took sent a tremor through the floor, and its eyes glowed brighter as it closed the distance. Ryan's mind raced. How had it found them so quickly? What kind of technology was this? "Left," Vortak shouted, grabbing Ryan's arm and pulling him into another hallway. They skidded to a stop in front of a massive door. It was covered in more glowing symbols, and as they approached, the symbols flared brighter. The mechanical pursuer was right behind them. "Can you open it?" Ryan asked desperately. Vortak hesitated for only a moment before slamming his clawed hand against a glowing panel. The door shuddered, and a low rumble filled the corridor. Come on," Ryan urged. With a final heave, the doors slid open just as the machine reached them. Vortak shoved Ryan through and then leaped inside himself. The doors slammed shut, sealing them in darkness. The sound of the machine faded, leaving only their labored breathing. "What now?" Ryan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Vortak didn't answer right away. In the dim light, his glowing eyes looked almost uncertain. "Now," he said finally, "we find out what's really hidden in this place. The truth of the planet." The chamber they had stumbled into was immense, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadow. Walls pulsed faintly, as if the very structure were alive. Thin, twisting patterns of light traced along the walls in deliberate, rhythmic sequences, giving the impression of a heartbeat. The air was heavy, almost suffocating. Ryan leaned against the cool black wall, struggling to catch his breath. Vortak stood a few paces ahead, his glowing blue eyes scanning the chamber's strange contents. Strange cylindrical devices were arranged in rows on either side of a central platform, each one humming faintly. Above them, the ceiling was lined with clusters of metallic orbs, the purpose of which Ryan couldn't guess. It all felt distinctly alien, different from the ruins themselves, as if this part had a very specific purpose. "What is this place?" Ryan asked, his voice hushed. Vortak's ears twitched. "A lab, perhaps, or a repository." He stepped closer to the nearest cylindrical device. They're not just storage. They're containment units. Containment, Ryan echoed. He moved cautiously toward one of the strange cylinders, the glowing patterns on its surface casting soft light onto his face. Up close, he noticed that the light wasn't random. It formed a grid of symbols that shifted every few seconds. He reached out a hand, but Vortak snapped. "Don't touch it." Ryan pulled his hand back. All right. What's inside them?" Vortak's expression was grim. "I'm not sure, but it's not meant to be released." Before Ryan could respond, a low rumble echoed through the chamber. Both of them froze. The vibration was subtle at first, but it grew steadily stronger. The pattern of lights on the walls quickened, changing color, becoming more erratic. The hum of the containment units grew louder, until the whole room seemed to vibrate with energy. "What's happening?" Ryan asked, his voice rising with panic. Vortak turned sharply. "The security system. Whatever that machine outside reported, this entire structure is reacting to us." As if in response to his words, a section of the floor in the center of the room slid open. A pillar rose slowly from the gap, carrying what looked like a smooth black orb suspended in a cage of glowing light. The orb rotated slowly, reflecting strange patterns of light across the chamber. Ryan and Vortak stared at it. There was something deeply unsettling about the orb, something that tugged at Ryan's instincts. He felt as if he were standing too close to a great fire, yet no heat came from it. "What is that?" Ryan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Vortak took a step forward, his gaze fixed on the orb. "A core. Some kind of power source, perhaps." His claws flexed. This structure, this entire planet might revolve around that device. Ryan's stomach churned. "Wait, you think this whole place is what? A machine? A giant experiment?" Vortak turned to face him. "I think this planet isn't just a frozen wasteland. I think it was built, and whatever built it didn't intend for us to survive." Ryan's mind reeled. Built by who? Why? The alien shook his head. "I don't know, but look around you." He gestured to the humming cylinders, the glowing walls, the strange orb that pulsed as if it were alive. "This isn't natural. This planet, this facility, it's a testing ground. Maybe for technology, maybe for life forms. And we're part of that test." Ryan wanted to argue, to dismiss the idea as paranoia. But the pieces were starting to fit. The unexplainable energy pulse that had caused his ship to crash. The predators that seemed to hunt relentlessly. The fact that Vortak had been exiled here, left to struggle against impossible odds. And now this, a hidden chamber containing something that felt wrong. "What do we do?" Ryan asked, his voice trembling. Vortak walked closer to the orb, his eyes narrowing. "If this is a core, shutting it down might disable whatever's hunting us. It could even deactivate the predators. If the planet is still functioning as a test site, turning this off could end the experiment." Ryan stepped forward, alarmed. "But what if it makes things worse? What if we set off something we can't control?" Vortak's gaze shifted to him. "Do you have a better plan, human?" Ryan hesitated. He didn't, but something about the orb filled him with dread. Before they could decide, a sharp metallic screech cut through the chamber. Ryan spun around, his heart pounding. One of the walls slid open, revealing a passage filled with glowing red light. The sound of heavy mechanical footsteps echoed toward them. "Security," Vortak growled. He moved toward the center of the chamber, positioning himself between the approaching threat and the orb. "We need to act now. Make a choice." Ryan's mind raced. Shutting down the core might save them, or it might destroy them both. Leaving it alone meant facing whatever was coming for them. There was no time to think. "All right," Ryan said, his voice steady. "Let's shut it down." Vortak gave a curt nod. Together, they moved toward the orb. The air around it seemed to ripple, making it hard to breathe. Vortak raised his claws, hesitating only a moment before slashing at the glowing cage that held the orb. Sparks flew, and the hum of the room grew louder, deeper. The floor beneath them began to shake violently. The orb dimmed, its light fading as Vortak struck again and again. Finally, with a deafening crack, the cage shattered. The orb dropped to the floor, rolling for a moment before going completely dark. Escape or stay? The roar of the collapsing ruins filled the air as Ryan and Vortak stumbled out of the ancient structure. The storm had only grown stronger, pelting them with ice and snow so thick it felt like walking into a solid wall. Behind them, the once imposing spires of the alien ruins began to crumble, their foundations no longer supported by the mysterious power source they had disabled. Each thunderous crash sent a tremor through the frozen ground. Ryan clutched his side, his ribs aching from a frantic escape. His breath came in ragged gasps, clouding the icy air in front of him. Every muscle in his body screamed for rest, but he knew stopping now wasn't an option. Vortak was ahead of him, moving steadily despite his injuries. Blood matted the fur on his left arm, and his movements were slower than before, but he pushed forward with a determination that made Ryan's complaints feel insignificant. "Where now?" Ryan called, his voice barely audible over the storm. The alien didn't answer immediately. He stopped, turning to scan the horizon. The snow obscured everything beyond a few meters, but Vortak's glowing blue eyes seemed to pierce through the whiteout. "Over there," he said, pointing toward a shadowy shape barely visible through the storm. It looked like a cliff face, sharp and jagged against the swirling snow. "There's a ledge. We can take shelter until the storm passes." Ryan nodded, though every step felt like dragging lead weights through the snow. He followed Vortak toward the cliff, the sound of the ruins' collapse fading behind them. When they reached the ledge, Ryan collapsed against the rock wall, sliding down to sit in the snow. His body begged for rest, but his mind raced with questions. He looked at Vortak, who stood at the edge of the ledge, gazing back at the direction they had come from. "You knew what was going to happen back there," Ryan said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion. "Didn't you?" Vortak didn't turn to face him. "I knew the ruins were unstable, but I didn't know exactly what would happen when we shut down the core." Ryan let out a bitter laugh. "So we might have just made things worse." "Possibly." Vortak finally turned, his gaze meeting Ryan's. "But we had no choice. That core was keeping this entire planet active. The predators, the storms, even the energy pulses that brought you here. Everything was tied to it. Leaving it intact would have meant certain death." "And now?" Ryan asked, running a hand through his damp hair. "What happens now?" "We just wait for another predator to find us. Hope another storm doesn't bury us alive." Vortak's eyes narrowed. "No, we find a way off this planet." Ryan let out a sharp exhale. "Right. And how exactly do we do that?" "I don't know if you've noticed, but we're a little short on functional spaceships." Vortak's expression didn't change. When the core was shut down, it sent out a signal. A distress beacon. I saw the symbols flashing on the panels before we left. Someone, somewhere, will have noticed. "Noticed, and then what?" Ryan asked. "You really think they'll just come and pick us up? What if it's not someone friendly?" Vortak's tail flicked once, a sign of irritation. "Do you have a better plan?" Ryan fell silent. He didn't. The wind howled louder, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Ryan stared at the ground, trying to make sense of everything. The ruins, the predators, the core, nothing about this place was natural. It wasn't just a hostile environment. It was a test, a crucible designed to see who could survive. "Why were you sent here?" Ryan asked suddenly. Vortak's ears twitched. "You already know why. I refused to kill. My people saw it as weakness. And me." Ryan said, "Why am I here?" "My crash wasn't random. That energy pulse, it pulled me down. I was never supposed to land here. So why?" Vortac's gaze shifted toward the horizon, his expression unreadable. I don't know. Ryan let out a frustrated sigh. Great, so we're just pawns in someone else's game. Perhaps, Vortac said quietly. But if we are, that means someone is watching. And if they're watching, we can still prove them wrong. Before Ryan could respond, a low, deep rumble shook the ground beneath them. His eyes snapped toward the direction of the ruins, but the source of the sound was farther off, much farther. It was a steady vibration, rhythmic and powerful, unlike the random collapses they'd heard earlier. What now? Ryan asked, his voice tight. Vortac stepped closer to the edge of the ledge, his eyes narrowing as he stared into the storm. Something's coming. Ryan scrambled to his feet, every nerve in his body on edge. What do you mean something? Another predator. The security drones. No, Vortac said, his tone grim. Something bigger. Ryan peered into the swirling snow, his heart pounding. In the distance, faint lights flickered through the storm, small at first, then growing brighter. The rumble became louder, steadier, until it was impossible to ignore. What is that? Ryan's voice trembled. Vortac stepped back, his claws flexing. A ship. A rescue ship. Ryan asked, hope creeping into his voice. Vortac didn't answer. The lights grew closer, their brilliance cutting through the blizzard. It wasn't a small vessel. This was something massive, something that moved with purpose. Ryan could see its shape now, a hulking form descending through the storm. As it came into view, Ryan's hope evaporated. The ship was black, its surface sleek and unmarked, with no visible insignia or markings. It wasn't a rescue ship, it was a warship. Vortac's face hardened. They've come for me. Ryan's stomach dropped. Your people? Vortac nodded. Yes, and they don't take kindly to failure. Ryan glanced at the approaching vessel, panic rising. What do we do? Vortac's voice was calm, steady. We fight. Ryan stared at him, disbelief flooding his system. Against that? Are you insane? They'll kill us both. Vortac turned to him, his glowing blue eyes filled with a determination Ryan hadn't seen before. We've survived this planet. We've beaten its predators, its traps, and its tests. This is no different. If they want to take me, they'll have to go through you first. Ryan blinked. Wait, what? Vortac smirked faintly. I'm joking, human. But we have no choice. If we don't fight, we'll never leave this place alive. The ship's engines roared as it descended, its landing gear cutting into the snow with a deafening hiss. Ryan's heart raced. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options. But as he glanced at Vortac, standing tall and unflinching despite the odds, a small spark of courage flickered within him. All right, Ryan said, his voice steadier than he felt. Let's do this. The ship's ramp began to lower, revealing figures clad in sleek black armor. Vortac's claws extended, and Ryan tightened his grip on a makeshift weapon he had picked up earlier. The wind howled around them, carrying the echoes of the planet's endless challenges. As the figures stepped out onto the snow, Ryan squared his shoulders. Together, he and Vortac would face whatever came next.